Good evening and welcome. The stimulus to do this webinar comes from the History and Heritage Committee of the former Prairie Star District. Carol Jackson, longtime chair of that committee, is with us this evening. With the reorganization into the MidAmerica region, we knew that we would want to connect with folks from the other two former districts to see what kinds of history initiatives they have engaged in. We are hoping that going forward, we will be able to establish ways for all of us to have a forum to share successes and to offer resources. More than half of you replied to the questions I sent out last week. Thank you very much. I learned right away that many of you are doing amazing historical work in your congregations. Here are just a couple examples from among many. Iowa City UUs have a 5-member historical records committee who do everything on the list of possibilities I sent out. Plus, they write a monthly newsletter article about an historical topic, and they also insist that they have fun. In Quincy, Illinois, Deanna Drew has written a book in honor of their 175th anniversary. Her book is posted on their website, and it is searchable. I tried the name search feature, and it's amazing. In the months to come, we'll find opportunities for all of us to learn about success stories like these. As Nancy mentioned, congregations in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Iowa, Illinois, southern Wisconsin, these congregations are mostly older than the one I am in. That's more history to explore and to communicate. Most of the examples in this webinar are from projects engaged in by the History and Heritage Committee or by my home congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So, why is it important to explore history? When I have a chance to give my elevator speech about Unitarian Universalism, I always include a little history from Transylvania and New England Transcendentalists. It's a history we share. It helps us understand who we are. Exploring history also encourages us to think critically about religion, including our own. Reading the history revealed in Mark Harris's book, Elite: Uncovering Classism in UU History, helps me understand why we sometimes have difficulty fulfilling our hopes for economic diversity in our congregations. Knowing about the 19th century Western Conference of Unitarians might help us understand why there continues to be some tension between Eastern and Midwestern UUs. When people ask me about Unitarian Universalism, I usually include this Jefferson quote in my answer. As historians, I hope that we try to keep an open mind, that we do not search history just to find evidence for our already existing beliefs. I am guilty, I confess. I have sometimes searched historical records to score points in arguments with friends. One example, someone in our congregation loves the fact that our fellowship was formed by Monroe husbands in 1952. My friend has been against every effort to grow, to buy a building, to call a minister. He insisted that fellowships should remain small, just as Monroe husbands intended. I finally did some serious reading and research about the fellowship movement and discovered that actually the National Unitarians initiated the fellowship movement with the hope of starting fellowships that would grow into larger congregations. Recently, Holly Ulbrich wrote a book about the fellowship movement. With my new knowledge of UU history, I beat back my friends' assertions as often as I could. That's human, I guess, but it's not the best way to do history. We study history to see further, to see more than where we are right now. Recently, I was chatting about church history with a young UCC minister, a serious fellow in his 30s. He said that the older members of his congregation like to look backward in time and the young like to look forward. For myself, I hope that young and old alike will look into our history as well as into our future, and that looking backward will help guide us into our future. So let's begin with what you are doing in your congregation now. During this webinar, we will be reviewing ways you can do history in your congregations. Some ways you might share your history. And how you might connect your congregation's history to the history of other UUs. Notice that on some of the slides, we provide links to potential resources. This one, for example, is on the website of the Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography. It is an alphabetical list of online resources for Unitarian and Universalist historians from Andover to Yale. These links are the same ones we sent out last week. During this webinar, we will be using examples from my congregation, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and from the experience of the Prairie Star District History and Heritage Committee. However, I am hoping that soon we will have a forum for communicating examples from each of you. So let's begin. What are you doing in your congregation now? I know that some of you are doing amazing things, congregational histories, historical dramas, pageants. Others of you might like some ideas about things you could start doing without a huge investment, things that you could start to do next week. We'll look at each of these suggestions in a little bit more detail. In 1974, after 22 years as part of a regional UU fellowship, my home congregation officially incorporated as an Eau Claire congregation. Last June, we had a festive 40 event to celebrate the 40th anniversary. We had a special history program for our Sunday service, and then we had a congregational festival with food, games, and lots of fun. It is important to celebrate. By the way, one of our teen members videotaped both the service and the festival. Later, she edited her footage into a 7-minute video about our festive 40. Since 1974, our congregation has had only 6 ministers. Some of you have had 20 or more. If you don't have a wall of ministers, it might be fun to make one for your congregation. The photos don't have to be studio portraits. Snapshots might be even more fun. One of you in your responses to my email last week said that you had a parade of ministers, and it was a skit apparently where one person represented each of the ministers that you had in your congregation from the beginning. That must have been fun. I know that.
It's Tim.
Yep.
This is Nancy.
Yes, I see that we just lost our slides. I got to back up to where we are now.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Whoop. That's too far. I'll just start over and move up toward. There. Okay. I know that some of you are already the official historian for your congregation. If someone else has that duty, volunteer to help. If no one is designated historian in your congregation, volunteer and then let us know. If you'd like help knowing what to do as congregational historian, we can send you a detailed job description that you can adopt, modify, revise, or use as is. Iowa City's Historical Records Committee is even better than one designated person. As the congregational historian, you might want to begin by checking out your congregation's website. Is there a history page on your site? Is it easy to find? Is it complete? Can you think of ways to make it better? Until 3 years ago, the Prairie Star District History and Heritage Committee was called the History and Archives Committee. We changed to the broader term heritage, but that didn't mean we were less interested in archives. Archives, photo collections, and other documents are the raw material essential to historians. They are the foundations of accurate and complete historical initiatives. There are plenty of sources that can help you know what to do. This page includes several. And Jane Kennemore, who is with us tonight, has been a professional archivist for many years, a fellow of the Society of American Archivists. She has her own consulting firm, and she is volunteering her advice to her own congregation in Evanston, Illinois. But most of us don't have someone like Jane to help us, and getting archival work done is sometimes tedious work. And yet, it requires a knowledgeable person to help make decisions. Until we acquired a building of our own, all of our congregational records in Eau Claire were stored in cardboard boxes that traveled from one officer to the next. In 1981, we bought our first filing cabinet, and we hired an office manager to begin sorting through our acquired archives, 27 boxes. Our new office manager turned out to be pretty ruthless, and she tossed some important historical materials. A file of materials, for example, about Monroe Husband's first visit to the Chippewa Valley, notes from the first meetings of the fellowship he formed here, the people he met, and so on. Fortunately, someone found these files in the trash, and we found that we had to provide her better guidelines and direct her sorting more closely. How to handle electronic records, computer disks, and files, it's a new challenge for archivists. How do you access documents stored on an old floppy disk? The computer of each committee chair becomes like the cardboard boxes we once used. The office manager for one Wisconsin UU congregation has set up a web-based Dropbox, and she asks anyone who creates a document to put a copy in the box. I'm not exactly sure what a Dropbox is, but probably most of you do. She has also tried to get anyone who creates a digital document to date it and label it according to a system she devised, and she admitted that her efforts to get systematic labeling were not going so well. Lots of luck with that, were her actual words. Here's an example of a celebration of the founders of my congregation. In our case, all but one of the founders is still alive. I know that some of you have histories that go back 175 years. A celebration of your founders will be different from the ones we have. Carol Jackson, the chair of the History and Heritage Committee, did a lot of work with her congregation's 105th, and I wonder if she would tell us a little bit about that now.
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Carol.
Great. I wasn't sure how this worked. We celebrated our 150th anniversary in 2009. And by we, I mean First Universalist Church of Minneapolis. The planning for this anniversary began in August of 2006 when a few members gathered under the vigilant eye of our Minister Emeritus, John Cummins. At that time, few people could barely pronounce sesquicentennial, let alone spell it. But what we did in the next few years, we thought was really remarkable. The energy of the steering committee was focused primarily on illuminating the past and celebrating the present. We did everything probably everybody else would do by reading old sermons, sorting pictures, writing newsletter articles, that kind of thing. What resulted was that the committee sponsored a number of major events. We had a Faithful Founders Weekend, which kicked off the sesquicentennial. We had a Darwin Day celebration, a sesquicentennial soiree, longtime members luncheon, Lake Harriet Family Service and Picnic, Founders Day homecoming service, ordination and installation of our new senior minister, and a human rights weekend. One of the things that's interesting to note is that during the 2+ years of planning this celebration, our parish minister departed, 2 interim ministers served the congregation, our associate minister went on sabbatical, and a new senior minister was called. So in a sense, it was really rather exciting to go from, the step of not having a minister to having a new minister on board. The Faithful Founders Kickoff Weekend was had as Paul Razor. I don't know if you know Paul Razor, but he was one of the kickoff speakers. We had John Hurley, who is the archivist from the UUA, was on board. John Cummins was on board. I should preface this by saying, because you're probably all wondering how much all of this cost. Our work was supported by an all-lay steering committee coordinating over 200 volunteers in celebrating and memorializing this anniversary. It was supported by contributions of over $72,000, which really was raised from members and friends. There was no money budgeted for this, just so you know that, which is, I'm not necessarily proud of saying that, but that was true. But in the meantime, we also ended up publishing a history that contained more than 30 articles and short essays that were researched and written by members, as well as a commemorative DVD. And we have all of that now to show for it. I think some of the other things that might be of interest, we created a sesquicentennial logo and a banner, so everything we did was branded with that logo. Various members wrote newsletter articles on a variety of topics, and we identified those topics ahead of time. We had no intent, really, of ever writing a book or doing a book. We kind of ruled that out from day one, and yet when we finished with all of these short...
Hello? Carol, I think we lost you. Thank you, Carol. I think I'm going to go on. If you come back on, let us know. When I visit UU congregations, I ask if they have a history bulletin board I could study, and I'm sorry to say that many do not. It's quite easy to do, and it's something that you can certainly start and do next week. Making a video can be more complex. This one represents an effort by the Prairie Star District History and Heritage Committee to show what is possible. This CD includes 2 videos, each about 30 minutes long. One is about the Mabel Tainter Memorial in Menominee, Wisconsin, and how it came to be built as a Unitarian church and community center in 1889. The other is about 2 Universalist ministers, Bisbee and Tuttle, who had a serious feud on the Minneapolis-St. Paul Universalist frontier. These 2 stories take place against the backdrop of the Western Conference of Unitarians' rebellion against the American Unitarian Association and the struggle of Universalists to deal with the question of whether or not Jesus was divine. By the way, the Mabel Tainter Memorial was named by CNN Travel as one of the 15 world's most spectacular theaters in the world. The History and Heritage Committee was hoping to encourage the creation of videos by others in the Prairie Star District, and so we sponsored a couple of workshops where we tried to show what could be done and to encourage video production. One of the video workshops was held at the Minnesota Valley Fellowship in Bloomington, Minnesota. And later, they produced this video, which features interviews with their founders. Videos are a great format for a presentation because they are portable and durable, and so are PowerPoints, like the one Victor Urbovanovitz did for a workshop at the MidAmerica conference last fall. Other presentations are more ephemeral, but also more dynamic and more fun. A couple of years ago, we had a study seminar, Sages of Concord, and then later some of the people who were in that seminar presented a Reader's Theater skit for a Sunday service. Victor Urbanovitz's congregation in White Bear Lake has a tradition of doing chancel dramas, and Victor has written a number of them himself, including this one based on the Herman Bisbee story that we made into a video, The Heretic of St. Anthony, and you can see the players. And they did this both in their home congregation and in 4 other congregations. He also did one called the Humanist Camelot in western Wisconsin, which was also performed in 4 different congregations, and was based on the Tainter story that we made the video for about the Mabel Tainter Memorial. This is the first slide from a PowerPoint created by Victor for the MidAmerica conference last April. I'm guessing he would send you a copy if you asked him. In fact, I'm sure he would. He would also be happy to share scripts from any of his chancel dramas as well. This photo is from a PowerPoint of historic Universalist and Unitarian churches in Eau Claire. The stories that go with these buildings connect the history of our region to the history of these 2 denominations throughout the United States. This building here was a Universalist church in 1858. The Universalist congregation, which had been meeting in a public hall, purchased this building, actually traded the school district of Eau Claire for this building. It had been a school. The school wanted to build a new school, and they traded the property for this building. This picture was taken in 1882, long after this building was no longer a church. But the minister at this church was a almost rabid abolitionist, and newspapers routinely called him a warmonger. And I'll just tell one other little story about this church. After the Civil War was over, Bertha Tainter, who was the mother of Mabel Tainter, for whom the memorial was built in Menominee, came to this building in 1867 to speak in support of the Freedmen's Bureau, which then President Johnson was trying to cancel. She was 6 months pregnant with twins, and it created quite a stir in the city of Eau Claire as well as in Menominee for a woman to come and address the church, and also for a woman who was 6 months pregnant to do that. The newspapers made quite a flurry about it. And then after she gave birth to Mabel and to Mabel's twin, Mabel's twin died, and then the Menominee papers especially said that that was her punishment for having so openly flaunted the mores of the community. So every little bit of history connects to other pieces of history. This is a church, a first Unitarian church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, built in 1889. It is still a church. It functions now as the Christian Science Church. Is actually right directly across the street from the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Eau Claire right now. This church was started by a friend of Bertha Tainter's, Dora Rust, who was a rich widow of a lumber baron, and she and Bertha were friends and traveled together. And Henry Doty Maxson, the first minister of the Unitarian Church, the Mabel Tainter Memorial Unitarian Church, also served this church. And Henry Doty Maxson was the secretary of the Conference of Western Unitarians. And at the Mabel Tainter dedication, Jenkin Lloyd Jones came to be the keynote speaker. So all of these pieces of Midwestern Unitarian and Universalist history kind of all tie together. Also, you can create a display. This one was created for the MidAmerica conference meeting in Wausau, Wisconsin. Or you can write a book. Again, Victor Urbanovitz participated in the creation of this book, The Twin Cities Unitarian Universalist Congregations, Past and Present. It was produced by the History and Heritage Committee, but the essays about individual congregations were written by members of the congregations. Then there was an editing team of 3, including Victor. I know that reading your responses to our questions from last week, a number of you have produced books for your congregation. In our view, history begins with the specific people and specific congregations pushing the arc of history toward justice. But it is also important to see how your own experience, your history, connects with the history of others. That's where we'd like to go this evening. When Reverend Ian Eveson, MidAmerica District Executive of Congregational Life, visited our history exhibit in Wausau, he made an important point. Sometimes folks don't think of themselves as historians. Instead, they are interested in an issue, a topic, a principle, and they seek out historical information to develop a deeper understanding of the things that interest them. This is another way to initiate historical enterprises. For example, Susan Foote, who is with us here in this webinar this evening, writes about the history of mental health in Minnesota. She has an article coming soon in Minnesota History, and the book soon after. She led a workshop on the topic last night, I think. And when I first wrote this, the treatment of mental illness on this slide, I was really thinking of Horace Mann, who had done a lot of work in Massachusetts in the 19th century on this topic. But it was a surprise and a pleasure to find out that one of our own, Susan, has been working on this in Minnesota. I'm going to back up. Yep, see. Another examples. I think there is somebody here this evening. I think Marcia Borden from Unity Temple in Oak Park, Illinois. And I think Reverend Ralph Jasinski from Madison is here. Those are the homes of two spectacular churches designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, whose uncle, Jankin Lloyd Jones, was one of the leading figures in Western Conference of in the Conference of Western Unitarians. So an interest in architecture might lead into an exploration of UU history. So we come really to the most important focus of this webinar. How can we go forward together? With the contact information you have provided us, we have set up an electronic mailing list. I think you have already received your first email as a member of this list. I think you'll have to take another step to sign in as being willing to receive this electronic mailing list. And on one of our first postings, we're going to ask you if you would like to participate in follow-up phone conferences. We'll be asking for your suggestions for times and topics. We would like to have those kind of bridge calls at least once a month, maybe on specific topics. By the way, if you don't wish to continue on this list, you can easily drop off at any time. More than half have responded to the questionnaire I sent last week, and I'm sorting through your responses now to see if we can create conversations to address selected topics and questions. For example, many of you are now engaged in planning congregational anniversaries, 150th, 175th, 50th, 15th, and some, like Carol Jackson, have recent experiences in celebrating an anniversary. Our hope after the webinar is to provide follow-up bridge calls, email chats, and other connections that bring those with experience and knowledge together with those who need it. We hope to use the new history email distribution list and to set up those monthly telephone conversations. And we will try to choose a topic and announce it for each month's congregation after we hear from you about times and topics. And now I think, Nancy, if it's okay, we can have time for questions. Hello?
Okay, Tim,
Yes.
this is Nancy. I'm going